Hi everyone, thank you for joining the session. So this study wants to investigate the impact of online learning on the anxiety and self-esteem of university students with dyslexia, and we've employed a mixed methods design for this study. So first we will see some background information about this study, what is the context of the study and why we wanted to investigate this topic. So dyslexia poses challenges such as difficulties in phonological awareness, processing speed and verbal memory, which affects learning ability, and therefore it poses additional challenges within academia and education. So a strong relationship has been found between dyslexia and poor psychological well-being. So it has been found by Carol et al. In 2005 that anxiety is more than twice as prevalent in children with dyslexia compared to those that do not have dyslexia. Also, it has been found that there is an issue with self-esteem and lack of confidence and lower perceived competence in academia for those that have dyslexia compared to those that do not have dyslexia, and also greater symptoms related to depression for those that have dyslexia versus to those that do not have dyslexia in higher education. However, more generally, the literature has mostly focused on children and adolescents, and the reason why we wanted to conduct this study in a higher education context was first that there were limited studies investigating the impact of dyslexia on learning in higher education. There has been we have some studies in the literature that have investigated this, like the Riddick et al. From 1999, that found that dyslexic students had significantly lower self-esteem, and they felt anxious and less competent compared to their peers. Or by Carol in 2005 that had found that dyslexic students had significant higher levels of anxiety following a demanding literacy task. But these studies have been more specific on states, psychological states like anxiety or self-esteem, or about a specific task like a literacy task. What we wanted to do was to investigate the impact of online learning more specifically on both students with dyslexia and those that do not have dyslexia. And the COVID-19 pandemic gave us a window of opportunity to assess this, because obviously at that time most of the learning was delivered through online ways. So we want to investigate potential successes and challenges of online learning for these students, but also the impact of online learning on anxiety and self-esteem for both students with dyslexia and their neurotypical peers as well. Now, the previous research has mixed findings in that area. So it has been found that students with learning difficulties are less likely to complete their modules, they're less likely to pass modules more generally, and even for modules that they had passed, they had obtained poorer grades compared to their peers that do not have learning difficulties. However, more positive experiences have been reported for students in online learning environments. So, for example, it has been found by Holder in 2007 that online learning can give some flexibility, and also students feel that they're not exposed to stigma as when they are in an in-person environment. Students also reported that they feel more comfortable in online learning, and they felt that it's more adaptable to their learning style and learning needs in comparison to traditional in-person teaching and learning. So the research aims of this study are three. So the first thing we wanted to investigate was about the anxiety and the self-esteem levels of students with dyslexia in the context of online learning. We also wanted to investigate the attitudes of students with dyslexia and of their peers as well, in terms of how they feel online learning works for them, and what are the potential successes but also the challenges that they have with online learning. And of course, we wanted to discuss the implications that this has for future learning within universities and higher education for both students with dyslexia, but also for their neurotypical peers. And the hypotheses that we've made were two. So we thought that students with dyslexia will most probably have higher levels of anxiety, but also lower self-esteem in comparison to students without dyslexia. So in terms of the methods, in terms of the methods and the number of participants that we've had in total 78 participants, and 27 of them were students with dyslexia, and the rest were neurotypical participants. We recruited them via opportunity, volunteer sampling. And we've also used the participant pool scheme that we have in the School of Psychology in Leeds, but also because not all schools have this scheme that you give credits to students for participation in the study. We've also used email ads, we've used posters as well, and to target specifically dyslexic students, we used the Leeds Union Disabled Students Network, but we've also used the Neurodivergent Society as well. The participants were asked to follow an online link to participate in the study, so it was a very straightforward process. And when they clicked on the link, the first thing was for them to read the online participant information document that was detailing all the information they needed to know about the study before agreeing to a consent form and consenting for the study. And the last part of that survey, which was the main bit, was the questionnaire of the study, and that was a 3-part questionnaire. So the 3 parts were: first, we wanted to assess the dyslexia severity, and this was obviously just for students that were diagnosed with dyslexia in the study. And this was the Smith and Everett checklist that we were asking students with dyslexia to complete. The second part and the third part were completed by all students that participated in the study, so from both students with dyslexia and students without dyslexia. The second part wanted to investigate the attitudes of these students towards online learning, and we use a 32-item scale that we had devised to evaluate their attitudes towards learning in an online environment. And for that, we've included both closed-ended and open-ended questions. And that gave us an ATOL score. So ATOL stands for Attitudes Towards Online Learning. The third part, we wanted to assess their psychological well-being, and there were 2 psychological states that we wanted to evaluate. The first thing was about anxiety, and we used the State Trait Anxiety Inventory. And the second thing was self-esteem, and to assess self-esteem, we used the shortened Rosenberg's scale. Now, for data analysis, we've adopted a mixed methods approach. So for the quantitative analysis, we have our dependent variables, that was the anxiety, self-esteem, and the attitudes towards online learning scores. And the independent variables, that was the dyslexia versus non-dyslexia student groups that we've had. Now for the quant analysis, we've had our descriptive statistics, we've run an independent sample t-test, and a correlational analysis, as long as regression analysis. And for the qualitative analysis, we've employed a thematic analysis. Okay, so these are the main results of the study, and we'll first see the quantitative results. So from the independent samples t-tests that we've run, we found the significant differences between the means of anxiety scores for the 2 groups of participants. So for dyslexia, for students with dyslexia and students without dyslexia, and you can see this in the figure at the side. There were no significant differences between groups, so between students with dyslexia and neurotypical peers for self-esteem or attitudes towards online learning. So the differences between dyslexia versus non-dyslexia was just for anxiety. And this has indicated that levels of anxiety are significantly higher in dyslexic students than in control students, but that also meant that there were no significant differences in self-esteem and attitudes towards online learning between the two populations that we were comparing, dyslexia versus neurotypical participants. So still staying on the quantitative part of the study, in terms of the correlation that we've run, we found a significant positive correlation between attitudes towards online learning and anxiety in both the target group and the control group, and you can see the figures here. We've also found a significant positive correlation between dyslexia severity scores and anxiety scores in the target group, and that indicated that dyslexia severity explained 28.6% of the variance. So severity was a quite big indicator in this. We've also conducted a qualitative analysis and specifically a thematic analysis to generate some things from my data sets. So for the target group, which was the students with dyslexia, we found that there is a theme about the need for adjustments to change in the environment. So the positives for this was that students can manage disability needs when there is an online learning. They can make their own schedule, they can work at their own pace, they can organize themselves better. The negatives of online learning in this online environment is that students with dyslexia reported that they didn't like the extended screen time. They didn't like the increased length of lecture that sometimes is associated with online learning, and they didn't like the lack of structure. They felt that when there is an in-person learning, they have a better structure in the learning. They can follow the timetabling a little bit more easily. In terms of the solutions that they put forward, they felt that they need for more concise content, so better information, more cohesive information from their lecturers. They think that will give them extra flexibility, and they want their lecturers to provide them this additional flexibility, not just the flexibility being provided already by the online environment. In terms of, for example, when they're going to watch a presentation, not just being live, but being recorded, let's say. So they like this to be given this additional flexibility, and they would also like lecturers to give them the opportunity to have some dyslexia-friendly colors. So, for example, some tinted yellowish background in the slides. Now, another thing that we've identified for the students with dyslexia is successes and challenges for the use of a digital platform of this online environment. So in terms of what they really enjoyed and they appreciated was that they can use a playback when there is online recordings, for example, and they haven't understood something. They could go back and take more efficiently notes. There was also positivity towards a 48-hour exam. This is the online exam that we have in UK university. So we give students, when we have online exams, 48 hours to complete their exams for each of the modules that they're assessed on, and they really like this compared to in-person exams that they had, let's say, an hour to work on an essay. And they also liked the communication in digital platforms, and that sometimes it was more thorough and elaborate, and it allowed them to understand things better. Because of things, as we've said, that they can use playback, they can ask questions sometimes in an anonymized way more easily through digital platforms. So these things were considered as successes. The challenges that students with dyslexia faced was that it was harder for them to read social cues when they were, let's say, in an online lecture. As I said, it was kind of overlapped with the previous thing on that thing, but there was a lack of consistency as well when there was an online environment, and they also felt that emailing was ineffective, so as a means of communication when all lectures and all teaching is delivered online. So they liked when they could, for example, ask questions in person rather than having to email their lecturer. In terms of the control group, that refers to students that were not diagnosed with dyslexia, we have found some different themes. So the first have to do with time saving. They really appreciated that being in an online learning environment saved them time from commuting. If the lecturer was speaking very slowly, they could speed up the lecture speed. And they felt that exactly because of this time-saving ability that they've had through online learning, they could produce more work to a higher standard. So they felt that they could be more productive. In terms of the stressors that they've had in the online environment, and what minimized these stressors in this environment, and what generated additional stress in this environment. So in terms of what minimized the stress for them was the anonymity, where the chat rooms, where the online presentations compared to having to deliver presentations in person in front of their peers in a lecture theatre. Another variable that minimized the stressors in an online environment was the 48-hour exam. So that was consistent in terms of how helpful it was between probably the groups. And one of the participants stated that less stress meant that they're in a better state of mind to absorb information, which is vital in a learning environment, as we all understand. What generated additional stress for them was that in an online environment we're feeling isolated, they didn't have opportunities for socialization, and that meant that they lacked the motivation or the engagement and the concentration needed for the learning, and sometimes they reported feeling distracted as well. Now, the last theme that was generated for the control group was about some suggestions about how to improve interactive teaching methods. They were quite vocal about how this can be done in universities. So they suggested quizzes and MCQs that are used in online platforms. They like the variety of platforms that we use in universities. Someone would expect that this is probably counterintuitive, that they would like more consistency, but the neurotypical participants, because that is very important, not those with dyslexia, like the variety of platforms that they could use in this online environment. And they also liked when they were in seminars or tutorials that there was encouragement of using videos and microphones. And again, this was different, as you can imagine, from those students that have dyslexia. Now, there were some shared themes between the target group and the control group, so they both enjoyed the flexibility that is provided in an online environment. And they also felt that it is very important to go beyond academic support. So they felt that the online environment made them realize how important it is to have mandatory well-being sessions. They suggested potentially staff training on well-being issues and the personalization and engagement that is needed from students, so staff could be trained about these things as well. So both groups were quite vocal about this and very clear about their expectations. So in terms of the implications of these findings, they are that by identifying any potential benefits as well as challenges of online learning experienced by both dyslexic and non-dyslexic students, this has the potential to help inform universities on the best way to create a more integrated form of learning in the future. And this is in a post-COVID-19 era, is very important to take into consideration all the lessons that we've learned through COVID and try to apply these results and these findings in a post-COVID environment and see what are the benefits identified for online learning and potentially maintain some of the online learning in post-COVID season and environment. But in terms of the challenges and things that both students with dyslexia and students without dyslexia find very difficult to take into consideration to potentially revert back to in-person. So have this mixed learning environment, but this mixed learning environment should be evidence-based on student experiences, and we feel that this study can really help with this.